Good morning and welcome to episode 2 of our webinar series, Shaping Business Sustainability Amidst COVID-19. Thanks to Mazars for this great collaboration. I think it's shaping up to be quite a fantastic series. So I trust you all still keeping well and staying safe. I think we're all looking forward to the 1st of June and the alert level being lowered to level 3 and all of us moving into level 3 when the handbrake on our economy will be slowly released. Hopefully it doesn't trigger mass drunkenness across the country. Yeah, a lot of people have been waiting quite patiently for alcohol sales to resume, so hopefully we'll all be responsible and do the right thing come Monday. But it certainly is good news that we're releasing the handbrake on the economy and we can slowly start getting things going again. I think it is a little bit concerning given the rate of infection at the moment and the numbers. And I think the onus of personal responsibility and for all of us to really take a lot higher level of care, particularly as we come into winter, has never been greater. But I think, that's exactly what it's about. Government cannot micromanage all of us, and we all understand the risks now, and we need to take responsibility to do the right thing and keep ourselves, our staff, our families, and so on safe during this crisis. So with this pandemic, massively disrupting business, it's fairly obvious a return to business as normal is fairly unlikely and not going to happen. And I think we also need to accept that many businesses will suffer considerable financial damage during this period. It's naive to think that anyone could escape this unscathed. And the reality is many businesses will not survive. So, given this, the high levels of uncertainty around how business will be required to operate safely in the future, how long alert levels may persist for, and of course there's always the risk that if infection rates do start spiking, that we may move back to a very severe lockdown period. So given this highly regulated environment that we'll need to operate under, the levers of control available to business are rapidly diminishing. I think one aspect where it is possible to drive a greater level of certainty and to retain some level of control is our financial well-being over coming months. And so I think, business is going to need high levels of agility. We should be actively planning and acting towards greater resilience and putting in place the mechanisms that ensure greater resilience, improved sustainability, and of course, rapid recovery post the crisis. We also need to know when to pull the plug if all else fails and all other options have been exhausted. And that is often the most difficult decision for any of us to make. That point at which you sort of feel that given the circumstances, your business may not be able to continue in its current format, and you need to pull the plug. And so how do you know when that point is where you need to stop throwing good money after bad, as it were? So all very important considerations, I think, at this time. And I think, unfortunately, for many businesses, we often leave it too late, and we explore those options when we have very little runway to actually implement any meaningful action. So timing is absolutely critical with all of this. The importance of your business continuity plan certainly cannot be understated at this stage. The need to be agile, and of course, stakeholder engagement. Are you paying attention to your stakeholders at this stage? Have you done a stakeholder analysis? Have you mapped all of that? And do we understand how we need to be engaging stakeholders at this stage, and how we may be able to leverage any assistance that may be available from some of our stakeholders? So all really, really interesting questions. And I think it's irrespective of the size of your business, these are the things that all of us need to be paying attention to at this stage. So really looking forward to today's conversation, and I hope you'll stay with us for the full session and make it as interactive as possible. We really want to hear from you as well, get a better understanding of what's happening within your business. Perhaps you have some good practice that you can share with the rest of the audience, or some insights that you've learned over the last couple of months. It was quite interesting at the start of this lockdown. I participated in a webinar with the British Chamber, and there were a lot of sort of medium-sized businesses participating in that. And at that point, everybody felt they could probably do 1 month of lockdown, and at a stretch, maximum 3 months. And as I've engaged with businesses over the last couple of months, that seems to be the norm. which is quite concerning because we're very much getting into month 3 now. And so I think a lot of businesses are having to make some very, very difficult decisions at the moment, and certainly can use all the help they can get. But like I said, we want it to be interactive. We'd like to hear from you. Our speaker, Justine, today is a seasoned professional at this, and has enormous insights and value that she can add, and assistance that she could bring to your business. So please do engage. Please use the chat box functionality to engage, or the Q&A if you prefer. And of course, as usual, all attendees are muted. But if you would like to engage the audience, please do raise your hand, and we give the opportunity to engage the entire audience. As usual, the session will be recorded. It's available on our YouTube channel, as well as our website. And as usual, we really encourage you to please share your thoughts with us, whether it's directly via email or any other forum. And feel free to suggest future topics that you may have an interest in, and so on. Okay, so moving on swiftly to today's session. Our speaker today is Justine Hopp. She's a Director, Senior Legal Counsel at Mazars. Justine is a highly skilled and experienced legal expert with more than 18 years of commercial experience. She's an essential part of the business advisory team at Mazars, specializes in addressing the legal issues that business rescue practitioners encounter during the course of a rescue or a restructuring. So Justine has been intricately involved in a number of significant business rescues in industries including retail, manufacturing, property, agricultural, construction, and the food and beverage sectors. She also provides support and advice to the Mazars liquidation team, and has extended their advisory support to other departments within Mazars, such as tax, commercial agreements, risk assessments, and sustainability. So certainly a very impressive CV, and just the person we need to take us through today's discussion. So on that note, Justine, I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation, and we'll engage a little bit afterwards around the Q&A.
Morning, Ryan, and good morning to everyone who's joined us. I think it's fair to say that winter has arrived in Cape Town. Certainly feels like the extended Indian summer that we had has fled, and snows on the mountains, so perhaps not the worst time to be stuck at home. I'm going to share my screen so that we can kick off the presentation, and bear with me as this is not my natural forte or habitat. Right, I think we are all set to go. As Ryan said, it would be great to have as interactive session as possible today. Please use the chat function, which I will refer to as we go through the presentation. I think it'll be far more interesting and engaging if we get feedback from you as the presentation goes along. And it just would be really interesting to hear what you're all facing in the day-to-day business that you're involved in, and these strange times that I think we find ourselves in. I know personally, when we started lockdown, and it was a 3-week period, I couldn't imagine 21 days at home. And we're now sitting at 9 weeks and 60 plus days. Interestingly, I think most of us have probably done a little bit better than we anticipated, and have adapted to working from home, as well as getting our teams to work from home more than we anticipated, which I think speaks to the flexibility that most of us have, but we don't really get to explore or push in ordinary circumstances. And for sure, we are not in ordinary circumstances. And I suspect that even when this is over, we'll never return to what was. It'll be a new normal. So a little bit about myself. As Ryan said, I'm a lawyer by training, so usually the least popular person in a room. I was in practice for just over 14 years, predominantly in commercial litigation, and then specializing in insolvency and restructuring. So interestingly, for most of my practice career, I saw things when they all went horribly wrong. And it's an interesting place to be, because I think it sometimes gives you a perspective as to what could possibly be done better at the outset. I joined Mazars just under 4.5 years ago in the restructuring team, and it's been a fascinating period of time just to walk out of the ivory towers of sort of the law firms and academics and producing nice opinions that tell everyone how they're meant to do things, and to move into a space where you actually get your hands dirty in a business, usually a distressed business, which comes with all the challenges as to how you practically put a lot of this advice into play. And it's been a good growth period for me, because I think what it's taught me is that in the day-to-day grind of running a business, you usually, or almost invariably, have to make compromises and decisions that best work with what you have at hand. And so I think that one of the great learnings in the last 4.5 years is that whether we've been involved, or whether I've been involved in listed entities or family-owned enterprises, many of the basics of business remain the same. And equally, complexity doesn't attach to the size of a business. So the fact that you may be running a listed entity does not mean that you're necessarily that your challenges are complex. And equally, smaller businesses often face real complexity with the challenges that they have at hand. So for the purposes of today, I'd like to share some of my insights with you. I don't profess to have any more or less working knowledge of business than many of you. In fact, I suspect less so. But what is often really useful when you're a third party or arm's length is that you can hold a mirror up to management and remind them of a lot of the tools that they already have at hand, and just provide that independent sounding board and thought process with which to work through and try and find productive solutions going forward. So it's going to be interesting to hear what kind of businesses we have joining us today, and in due course, maybe we can explore some of the challenges that you've experienced, not only in the last 9 weeks, but perhaps leading up to that, because I think it's fair to say that while COVID has placed everybody under an extreme form of stress, there was an extended period of economic slowdown prior to COVID, and a lot of businesses were taking strain before we even had our lockdown kick off on the 27th of March. Right, so kicking off, that's a fairly scary slide. But I think what it represents is the overwhelming amount of information that is, I think, thrown at us on a daily basis at the moment. There are various opinions. It's hard to work out whether you're reading credible news or fake news. There are ongoing challenges as to how quickly information is changing. And I think we can all accept that even looking beyond our shores, there's relatively little known about COVID. And as a result, it's easy to get sucked into a vortex of somewhat chaos and confusion. And at a time when individuals and particularly people involved in business should be as productive and focused as ever, it's increasingly difficult to do so. And I think added to that is just the extended stress of the crisis we find ourselves in, where it goes far beyond simply our businesses, but extends to family, friends, our children, schooling. So there are a lot of distractions at the moment. And if one thinks that probably the worst place for a business to be is static and stagnant, it's increasingly evident that the most important thing that businesses do need to be doing at the moment is plotting a way forward, even if that is simply, for the moment, one foot in front of the other. As Ryan said, I think if now more than ever, it's important to be agile and flexible, creative, re-look at how you do things, accept that just because you did things in a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way to do things. And certainly when we look forward, the chances are that we are going to be doing things very differently as the next few months unfold. And I think possibly more importantly, while we're in the acute phase of the crisis at the moment, and we're in this lockdown stretch, which hopefully from the 1st of June will lift slightly, the truth is that the ramifications of this crisis are going to unfold for many months to come. And I think it's fair to say that the greater challenges possibly lie ahead of us. Particularly in the Western Cape, where I think we can accept there's a particularly strong skew to the hospitality and tourism industry, which, as we know, has been amongst the hardest hit and is probably going to be amongst the last to open up. So with that in mind, it's fair to say that for a lot of business owners, it's hard to see the wood for the trees. And before we get on to some fairly scary numbers, perhaps I can ask you to drop some comments into the chat function, and let's find out what it is that everyone is finding challenging at the moment. So I see that there's a comment here about the uncertainty around how we may be regulated going forward. And I think that is a really good comment and a concern that is possibly shared by all of us. part of that, I think, is the uncertainty regarding what level we're going to be at. I think we can accept that we'll be going nationally down to level 3 on the 1st of June, which is, I think, a great relief to most businesses as it opens up the greater economy. But I think together with that becomes other concerns, and I think Ryan spoke to it when he said one of the challenges is going to be that you might prepare a business continuity plan that accounts for level 3, and depending what happens with our infection rate, we might see ourselves going back up to level 4 or even level 5, particularly when we look at the numbers coming out of the Western Cape. And we'll get to it in due course, but one of the things that we'll talk about is the necessity to create scenario planning that accounts for these variables. And that's accepting absolutely how challenging that can be, particularly as you're also trying to run a business operationally. And then the next comment regards managing cash flow and the uncertainty regarding client payments. We will definitely touch on that. I think that's a universal challenge, and again speaks to scenario planning. And how we can try and account for what the variables will be. And as I say, there's a lot that we are not able to plan when there is so much that is beyond our control. But one of the things that is largely within our control is our financial well-being and our financial sustainability. And to that end, I'm not suggesting that we can rely on all our payments coming in or our clients being in a position to settle invoices, but what we can do is at least plan for it. And by giving ourselves the time and space to plan, it gives us the opportunity to understand our worst case scenario somewhere in the middle, and obviously our best case scenario, which at least gives you some benchmarking to better understand how you can possibly plan going forward. And then I think we all need to accept that that needs to be reviewed and revised on a far more frequent basis than would ordinarily have been the case. So yes, I think we all have a massive fear of the unknown, and I think it's human nature to struggle, particularly where there's no certainty. Somebody said to me recently, I could cope with lockdown. I could cope with week 9 if only I knew when it would end, if only I knew what the regulations for level 3 would be, so I'd have a better understanding of what that meant for my business. If only I knew when schools were opening, so I understood when my children would be back at school, so that I can too be more productive and get back to work. So I think, and we'll speak to it again as we go through the presentation, but I think that one of the really comforting things to a large extent is that nobody is going to get through this crisis untouched, and we're all in it together. And it's probably one of the few instances where absolutely everybody is going to be touched by this crisis in some extent. Some, unfortunately, are possibly not going to survive it, but no one is going to get through unscathed. And I think that what that does allow is for a collective brainstorming of how we can possibly help one another to get through this. And we've seen small and large instances of that already coming through. All right, so I think possibly I see there's other comments coming through on redefining our value proposition, revising your business model, and things like staff and incurring debt. And all of those are valid, and perhaps I'll ask you just to hang on to those for a little bit. We're going to get back to the slides, and I'm hoping to touch on all of those as we go on. If for some reason I don't get, or you would like to ask a little bit more, we'll reopen the chat function and let's have another conversation about it. So I'm going to minimize chat for now, and we're going to get on with the slide. Right. So this is the crisis in numbers, and some of it is, I think, fairly scary, but I think that it's important for us to understand exactly what we're facing, because it is easier to plan, I think we can all accept, if you have an idea of what you're planning for. So at the outset of the first 3-week lockdown, the hard lockdown, Treasury estimated between 100 and 200,000 business closures. We are now in week 9, and it is fairly safe to say that the experts agree it is very difficult to now estimate how many business closures we are likely to face. It's going to be considerably more than what was previously estimated, and we don't have to look too far. The UK, the US is giving us a good indication, as well as some of the European countries too, of the full economic ramifications of COVID, as well as the various forms of lockdown that have been implemented. So for April 2020, there were roughly 20,000 job losses. Rather scarily, Treasury recently estimated that if you extrapolate the full extent of the crisis through to its conclusion, as well as the invariable and unavoidable consequence on the economy, we're looking to up to 7 million job losses, which is really a hard number to get your head around, particularly in the socio-economic environment of South Africa. So Statistics SA conducted two surveys, one in the third week of lockdown and one last week. So it's quite an interesting set of data to look at, and speaks to sort of how the crisis has evolved and unpacked. So just looking at some of those numbers, at the third week of lockdown, 5 in 6 businesses reported a decrease in turnover. No surprises there. I think for a lot of businesses, the hard lockdown from the 27th of March meant a almost instantaneous shut-off of revenue, bringing with it some massive challenges as to how to very quickly account for something that I think, was unexpected. I don't think anybody was unaware of COVID. Certainly anyone who follows the news had seen how it was unfolding offshore, but I think the speed at which it unfolded in South Africa caught many of us unaware. 54% of the businesses said they could sustain between 1 and 3 months of lockdown. And Ryan spoke to the fact that that's what came out of his recent interactions with the British Chamber of Commerce. And it's interesting to see that it's so similar. I think one of the greatest challenges with those numbers is that for a lot of businesses, it would have been a matter of, did they just simply try and survive the 1 to 3 months? And then obviously the challenge then is we're coming to that 3-month period and what happens beyond. And then there would have also been businesses who would have assessed that 1 to 3 month period and said, well, how do I get beyond that? I'm going to plan now for getting beyond that. And there's going to be a lot of people that fall into both categories, and there's going to be slightly different challenges in how you plan going forward, depending where you are. Again, I think it's the uncertainty. And I think part of what we need to unpack today is it is uncertain. That's not going away. So how do we effectively take control of what we can control and plan as best we can for the next 6 to 12 months and possibly beyond? 68% of respondents were concerned about the long-term impact of the crisis. I think that speaks for possibly all of us now that we understand that we're quite quickly, I think for many of us, have got to almost a 3-month period. And we're starting to understand how that squeeze is starting to affect our businesses and our daily lives, and how it's not going anywhere. We haven't even hit the peak in South Africa. We know that's coming anything from the next 1 to 3 months from now, depending on who you're listening to. But certainly if you're following the numbers of the infection rate, it is starting to increase at an alarming rate. And it's speaking to that upward curve that we've watched so many other countries go through. And invariably, we're going to have to get to that peak before we start to see the numbers coming down again. Tied into the long-term impact of the crisis, of course, is the fact that a vaccine, while, we've got scientists all over the world working as hard as they possibly can, estimations are that we're unlikely to see a vaccine within 12 to 18 months. And then the question becomes how easily available it'll become in a country like South Africa. So without doubt, the long-term impact, I think, is becoming increasingly concerning for everyone. 21% had a reduced income as a result of a whole or a partial shutdown of the businesses that they own or work for. A 10% increase in those with no income compared to the 6th week of lockdown and prior to the lockdown period. Interestingly, I was reading some of the results of Stats SA on liquidations, which had decreased, and don't be fooled by that. Often what we see is that as the economy becomes more and more depressed, liquidations do invariably drop off because the perceived value in pursuing a liquidation starts to diminish, because businesses have less assets or less recoverable means with which to pay creditors what they would get in a liquidation. And often we see that liquidations are driven by the financial institutions or very large creditors, and they simply don't have the appetite when the economy is as depressed as it currently is, bearing in mind that you've also got to pay attorneys, you've got to go to court for your order. So there's those costs that invariably come into play as well. If one looks beyond South Africa to countries that are fairly ahead of us as far as the crisis and the evolving nature of it goes, there's some fairly scary numbers coming out there too. So the International Labour Organization predicts that half of the global workforce is in immediate danger of losing their livelihood. I found that one particularly scary. And the US and the UK have seen an unprecedented rise in unemployment claims, with the US topping 38 million unemployed people. So with that in mind, I think it's fair to say that we all understand just how extreme this crisis is and how it is going to continue to unfold in our lives for many, many, many months, if not years to come. So I thought that was quite apt. I can't tell you what the future holds. However, I can share some approaches we use to structure the chaos. And we've all seen the buzzwords: unprecedented times, global pandemic, quarantine, the new normal. If you don't read them once or twice a day, you're reading them every other day. And they're easy to throw out. I think the key is, how do we now plan for it? And so while so much remains uncertain and beyond our control, let's think about what we can do. So I think everyone accepts that there's no silver bullet. For many South African companies, there was a lot of uncertainty and financial strain prior to COVID, and we had experienced a fairly extended period of slowdown in the economy. There were already concerns about rising unemployment and about many of the economic struggles that were being faced by all manner of businesses, but particularly small and medium-sized owner-run businesses. And I think that what the crisis has done is it's laid bare the frailties of many businesses. And it's just overlaid an extreme form of stress, which is causing many businesses to creak and crack. So if we think that the crisis has three phases, it's got the acute phase, which is where we currently find ourselves. That's roughly 1 to 3 months. The suppression phase, which is roughly 6 to 9 months. And then the recovery phase, which is roughly 12 to 24 months. It becomes clear why it's imperative to understand your business at its core, to be honest with yourselves as management as to what the strengths and weaknesses are, and to develop a business continuity plan that you constantly review and go back to better understand how you can plan for the next roughly 24-month period. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And what we hope to do today is to cover off some of the key principles to help you plan. So in the restructuring and distressed business environment that my team works in, these are some of the common strategies that we look at when we get into a business and when we sit down with management and we start to unpack what are the challenges. So the first one would be a cash flow gap analysis. Second is to identify your stakeholders. Third is to identify your trusted advisors and to explore how much you engage and rely on them. Fourth is an operational review. And a fifth is a more generic global one, which is just know where you stand, understand your business. It's obviously not a closed list. And if there's anything else that you'd like to discuss and explore during the course of unpacking those 5, please do let me know. We will stop as we go along so that we can perhaps chat about each of them and find out what challenges you're all facing. And obviously, if you are running a business that is in a very specific industry or perhaps a very regulated industry, you're also going to have other things that you would have to take into consideration. For instance, perhaps your engagement with a regulator, for instance. So this is, I think, the universal top 5 key strategies to consider. And if there's anything else that you would like to cover off that's specific to your industry, I'm happy to do it. So let's kick off with the first one. Cash flow gap analysis. So I think the important thing when it comes to your cash flow analysis is to first take a historical snapshot, I think, or picture of your business in the 2-month period leading up to the crisis. And I think what that does is it allows you to have a fairly honest assessment about where you were before COVID hit, because there needs to be an understanding of what weaknesses were already in existence in your business, and to accept and understand and perhaps unpack those, and then to consider how the crisis has affected your business and perhaps brought in strains or stresses that are new, but add to what perhaps was already there. And one of the things that requires some analysis when you are looking at this is obviously looking at your profit and loss, looking at your balance sheet, and then your cash flow. So tied into cash flow is also things like your working capital management. For instance, we were involved in a business a couple of years ago, a big retail business, with a really strong management team. And one of their biggest challenges was their working capital requirements. They were buying stock on cash or roughly 30 to 60 days, but they were often turning their stock in 90 to 120 days. And, there's no easy answer for that, but we did engage with a number of their suppliers. We tried to bridge and push that gap together a bit. We got it right in some instances. In other instances, suppliers weren't prepared to budge, but at least we enabled management to bridge it and close it as best possible so that there wasn't this holistic, massive gap between the two, which was obviously placing a massive stress on their cash flow. So I think when looking at your cash flow and accounting for the crisis, some of the things that you can look at are what are the restrictions in movement, the disruptions in supply, your chain of delivery and your reduction in demand. How are those feeding into your business and affecting your cash flows? Understand where the shift has happened from perhaps your supplier through to your client, and how best you can account for it and possibly restructure some of what you do in order to create some flexibility or to account for the crisis and the change that's brought to our environment. I think the other thing that's often overlooked is, and I think somebody in the last chat raised it, is look at your debtors. Have an honest assessment of where that is. It's easy for a lot of us to look at, for instance, if you're in the services industry, you look at your work in progress and you say, well, work in progress looks fantastic. Yes, it might, but I think we have to accept that the ability of some of our clients to pay us is going to be less certain. And I think specifically as we progress along through the crisis, it's possibly going to become less certain as we go along, but certainly before it starts to improve. So if, for instance, you issue your invoices on 30 days, it's to firstly understand what your anticipated recovery is likely to be. And to be fair, that's not an exact science, but I think at least one needs to apply your mind to it. And where you've got historical data sitting on your books and you're already looking at perhaps 60 or 90 days, is to really proactively manage that process, engage with the people who owe you money and find out what the problem is. It's no point pretending that bad news doesn't exist. I think it is easier to make a plan if a client says to you, there's no ways I'm going to pay. I can't, I'm a restaurant, my restaurant's been shut down. Alternatively, they might say to you, look, in turn, I'm struggling to get my payments in, but they are coming in. They're just coming in a bit slower than normal. Can we possibly agree to some kind of step down payments so that I also keep some cash flowing to you, but unfortunately, I can't get it all to you at the 30-day mark. So I think it's just, again, important to unpack that and to really get your hands dirty, get into the granular detail of all of that, and understand where your business stands relative to who you engage with. And I think that by assessing all of those things, you're going to start to get a far better sense of where your business is. And we'll speak to some of the contingency planning that needs to happen when we do find ourselves in a crisis like we currently are. Because the better your assessment, the easier it is to start doing your scenario planning from, as I said, worst case scenario through to best case scenario. And ideally, one would always like to land somewhere in the middle, but it is quite hard to work out where that is at the moment. So I think perhaps, seeing as we're on cash flow and a couple of people did have some questions, let's open up the chat box again and have a bit of a discussion around some of the challenges you're facing. So some of the questions is incurring is value proposition and revising your business model, which I suppose to some extent does play into cash flow, in the sense that if you've for instance, we've seen in the restaurant industry, you know, if you've had this immediate shut off of cash flow, is to perhaps redefine what you're doing in order to generate perhaps not the revenue that you were operating at prior to the crisis, but certainly to bring something in which can hopefully tide you over and get you through difficult times. We've seen small restaurants, for instance, converting their space into sort of a more boutique grocery store. We've seen restaurants that traditionally only did sit down, changing and ramping up their service offering to do takeaways or, you know, frozen meals for home. So there certainly is, you know, a lot of flexibility out there. And I think it speaks to that intrinsic entrepreneurial spirit that has always existed in South Africa, and which I really hope we're going to see come to the fore in the coming months. Someone's question is it wise to defer tax payments to improve short-term cash flow? So I think this speaks to a couple of the initiatives that are on offer for businesses at the moment. There are the deferments that SARS has offered. There are holidays being offered by the banks in terms of repayments of facilities. And you know, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I think that what you have to be careful of when looking at the deferments is what the terms of the deferment are. Because if you're simply going to be kicking the can down the road, and in a couple of months' time, you're going to face not only repayments to SARS, for instance, but also to your bank, you might find that you have alleviated a little bit of cash flow strain now, but created a really big problem down the line. So I think that one of the things that perhaps you need to consider before you simply jump in and start taking deferment of payments here, there, and everywhere is perhaps whether you truly need it right now. And if you really need it right now, where do you need it? You know, and also what kind of deferment are you looking at? Not everyone is offering the same terms of deferment. And so I think that where I'm particularly concerned at the moment when I look at the various deferments or holidays that are being offered is that initially the time frame for payments kicking off again was roughly 4 to 6 months after the deferment. Given that we're in week 9 now and we're heading quite nicely into that last of the 3-month period, suddenly 4 to 6 months doesn't feel so far away. And so I think that it's important that you really unpack and understand what the prospects are of kicking up those payments when they do fall due for payment. So I think it is useful. I think used correctly, it can really be a great alleviator of cash flow strain on businesses. But I think that one must use it cautiously. And as I say, interrogate the necessity to implement it now. If you can possibly get through the next few months and perhaps utilize those deferments a little bit further down the line when you have a better sense of both your business and also the industry within which it works, it might be wiser to do that. Right, I don't see too many other questions coming through. There is a question on staffing, which I think we can perhaps deal with under stakeholders, although I fully appreciate that also plays into cash flow, and perhaps it's worth just pointing out at this stage that when you are looking at your cash flow, tied into that obviously needs to be a review of your operational requirements and a very honest discussion within management as to your staffing, and assessing whether you need your full staff complement, whether they all need to be working full-time, whether you can be taking advantage of things like TERS to assist you. All of that obviously will feed into the assessment of both your cash in as well as your cash out. Right. I'm going to move on from the chat now to the second. Where am I? There you go. Sorry, I seem to be struggling to move on to the next slide. Apologies, bear with me. For some reason, my screen seems to have frozen. and I can't seem to. Right, there we go. So the second key strategic consideration, which we often spend quite a bit of time unpacking with management, is to identify your stakeholders. I think this is important no matter where you find yourselves as a business, whether you somehow happen to be amongst the small minority that are doing quite well in the current crisis, or whether you are facing extreme challenges. I think that the difficulty is that we often go into businesses and they can identify sort of one or two of their key stakeholders, but they haven't done the exercise of unpacking the full complement of their stakeholders in their business. And even if they can tell us who their stakeholders are, they often haven't had a meaningful engagement with them. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is, particularly when we are in a crisis, because in the environment that we currently find ourselves in, I think it's fairly safe to say that everybody is facing strains. And so if you sort of hunker down and disengage from the people who are an intricate part of your business, it creates greater levels of uncertainty, and it makes it a lot harder to plot a way forward. So I think that your key stakeholders generally would be your employees, including any unions that may represent them. It would be your shareholders. It would be the management of your company. It would be your creditors. And then I usually separate out financial institutions from your sort of general trade creditors. Again, if you're in a very regulated environment, that would also usually include the regulator for your specific industry, because often there's compliance issues that get tied in with that. So one of the things that we see frequently is an erosion of trust. And, I think there's two ways that can happen. The one is you're under financial pressure, the wolf's at the door, so to speak, and instead of opening the door and saying, let's sit down and talk, as hard as this may be, you sort of keep the door firmly shut, you don't answer emails, the telephone rings off the hook, and you just sort of hope for the best. But I think that the most important thing when you're under pressure is to have those honest and frank discussions. And I think that in the environment that we find ourselves now, they're hard to have, because, you pick up your phone and you phone your biggest supplier, for instance, and invariably they're going to be facing their own pressures. And so it is really difficult to partner with your stakeholders and to find a road with which you can walk together. But I think that equally, if you just close that door and don't answer the phone, it just creates this mistrust between the parties, and it becomes really difficult to develop any kind of ability to walk together. And I think that we are in unusual circumstances where there's far more to be gained from everybody working collaboratively and trying to help one another out. And I think that you can see that from just looking at the response of the banks to the crisis. It's unprecedented to see the big commercial banks so quickly come to the fore to try and partner with government, to partner with business, and to try and find some way of alleviating this intense stress that has been placed on individual businesses, but also the economy as a whole. And I think the same goes for employees. Again, we're all aware of the challenges currently facing businesses and individuals. We all understand, or should understand, that businesses are under a huge amount of pressure. There are invariably going to be businesses that don't survive this crisis. There are going to be a lot of jobs that are going to be lost in that process. And for those of us who are employees, myself included, I think we understand that we're going to have to work harder, work smarter, put our hands up more, and to try and do our bits to get through this. But as management or business owners yourselves, I think that the key takeout for me is the more you sit down and have those conversations, the greater the chances are that you can find some kind of compromise that, while perhaps unpalatable, is sort of equally unpalatable for everyone involved. And, through that, I often think you do find a collective solution. We were involved in a business sort of a year or two ago. It was a farming enterprise. At the time we were brought in, it was because there was sort of this warring relationship between the bank involved and the family whose business it was. And the bank was insisting that it be liquidated, and the family was up in arms and saying, you can't possibly liquidate this business. We might not be particularly liquid, but we've got all these assets. It should go into business rescue. And there was almost the stalemate because you had these two competing court applications, and I think a lot of people were throwing a lot of money at lawyers, but they weren't finding a solution. And so they agreed collectively to appoint us to come in and to try and assist them in finding a plan, that they could implement that would possibly help everybody. And, I think that there would be a great example of a relationship that had just fundamentally broken down. The bank had asked and asked and asked, and there'd been too many broken promises. And so the bank then took a hard line, although it was very happy to concede that there was plenty of assets sitting in this company. There just wasn't a whole lot of cash. They weren't interested anymore in understanding how you could possibly realize some of those assets in order to bridge the lack of cash flow. And then equally, you had the business itself and the family that sat behind the business, sort of expecting the bank, quite honestly, just to wait in line and wait its turn with very little appreciation, or perhaps not a lack of appreciation, but just such a fundamental breakdown in that relationship that they'd moved to the opposite end of the spectrum, just saying, well, you must just wait and you've just got to give us more time. And we sort of acted as a go-between for quite some time, understanding the perspectives of both parties. And it took quite a while, longer than we'd anticipated, with a couple of failed attempts to find some alternative finance. But we did eventually manage to exit the bank, bring in a new financier, and return the company to its management. So there are ways, if you have gone too far down that road, to get third parties involved and to try and help you bridge that divide. But ideally, what would be really good is to see businesses proactively managing that relationship, or those various relationships within your business, so that you can try and head off really big issues at the pass, so to speak. Try and have those honest discussions, and rather find a way forward, as I say, even if it is slightly uncomfortable for everybody involved. And I think, one of the possible positives that come out of a crisis like this is that it does give you the opportunity to really deepen a lot of the relationships that you have. Through challenges and through stresses and strains, we often find commonalities and things that actually bind us together. And again, just speaking to that entrepreneurial spirit within South Africa, that that sort of intrinsic thing of South Africans to just make a plan, while not negating a lot of the very real strains that we all currently face, just does allow us to forge a path forward. And now is as good a time as any to really sort of reach out and have those conversations with the people that mean the most to your business, understand where they find themselves, and have those discussions around everyone's challenges, at least in an attempt to find a way forward. I'm going to move on because I think that we can have a chat on some of these issues on a more global basis. So one of the key considerations beyond your stakeholders, for me, is your trusted advisor. For a lot of businesses, they'll ordinarily have accountants that have worked with them for extended periods of time. Some of your businesses will have attorneys that have worked with you for an extended period of time. When things get hard, there's often this sort of human response where it just almost becomes too difficult to reach out. You're trying to keep your head above water. You're trying to just make a plan on a daily basis. We frequently see hope springs eternal. It's really tough this month, but next month will be better. I'm struggling to sort out my cash flows now, but in 3 months' time, it should all come together. And Ryan touched at the outset on the importance of timing, and I think that cannot be overstated. The challenge, generally speaking, but particularly in the circumstances in which we now find ourselves, is that time is not on our side. And for a lot of businesses who are now facing financial constraints, even if they're not actually fully distressed at this point, are on a trajectory to get there. And so while you may not want to engage the insights of a business rescue practitioner or a liquidator or a restructuring expert at this point, what you really should be doing is engaging with your trusted advisors, because they know your business and often have some really interesting insights into your business. But I think even more importantly, they work with a whole variety of clients in all kinds of industries, and that gives them quite a unique perspective on business generally and on what's going out there, what's going on in different industries, communities, different sized businesses, because while we all have challenges that are unique to us and our businesses, there are a lot that are universal. And with that insight together with the independence, I think it just brings an interesting perspective into a business, because the harder things get, often the more we close in and just focus on what's right in front of us, when actually what we really should be doing is just trying to look a little bit beyond where we are. Because if we don't plan, invariably all we're actually doing is treading water, and the prospects of then just simply toppling over become greater and greater. And I think the other thing, particularly if any of you are really feeling the financial pressures of the crisis, if you're in an industry that's been really hard hit by COVID, the other thing that's really important is to understand from an accounting and a legal perspective what some of the pressures you're facing mean. So for instance, when we speak to management for the first time, one of the first things that invariably, because we deal with distressed businesses, but one of the first things they often say to us is, my inbox is piling up with letters of demand. My creditors are putting pressure on me. They're sitting on me. They want me to pay, but I can't, or I can't pay in full. And one of the first things that we'll ask them is, show us some of these letters. Are you, because certainly from my background, I've always said, he who shouts loudest gets paid first. So often the very first thing that you're going to see when things get hard is you're going to see creditors start jumping up and down and sending off fairly harsh, sternly worded letters saying, you pay or else. But there is a difference from a planning perspective between an email that says, plan me or else, and then what we call a Section 345 letter, which is a statutory letter of demand, which if you don't deal with, allows a creditor to immediately apply for your liquidation. And it's not difficult to understand. The consequences of the two are extreme, to say the least. So if you can reach out to your advisors at a time where you're under pressure and trying to simply keep operations and the day-to-day ticking over, is to put some of that on your advisors. Alleviate yourselves of some of that stress and allow them to do their jobs and to assist and support you in doing yours. And then I think tied into that is also to reach out to them where they can possibly take over things like TERS. I think everyone accepts it has been a really tricky and challenging process. Certainly the people that I've engaged in, some people say that they've put the applications in, it's been smooth, payments come in. Other people say to me, well, I put in the application and for reasons entirely unknown to me, some of the applications were approved, some weren't. I can't get any response out of the UIF. I don't know why. I don't know how to explain it to my staff. And, it's so overwhelming. And I think that when one looks at what's on offer between the banks, SARS, the various funds, TERS, it is really easy to become overwhelmed. It's easy to understand why businesses just simply don't know which way to turn. They don't know what they're eligible for. And I think that in circumstances where businesses really need to be planning on how they operationally go forward, reach out to your advisors and put some of that with them, just so that you can best concentrate on what you do. Maybe now's a good time to open up chat again and see if there's anything else that perhaps you'd like to address. Not too much coming in. Maybe we just give it a second or two more and see if there's anything that might be of interest to you. Sorry. And that you're facing and finding challenging at the moment. I think it's fair to say that no day is the same for any of us at the moment. Certainly not with the ever-changing regulations and requirements. It's hard not to feel as though we're all under this really immense pressure. Somebody said to me the other day that considering how much time we're spending at home, we're all exceptionally tired. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on. Right, operational review is the fourth consideration and is fairly self-explanatory. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I think that it's fair to say that now is the time to take a look at your operational requirements, to understand your business at a really deep, detailed level. If you're running multiple service lines, assess whether they're all necessary, whether they're all core to your business. As I said a little bit earlier in the cash flow slide, from an operational perspective, review your staff complement. Where necessary, engage with your staff about possibly amending hours. Alternatively, explore things like retrenchment to the extent that it's necessary. It's a very difficult thing, I think, for any business owner or management team to consider things like retrenchment in the current environment. But I think it's important to just remember that if you make sound decisions quickly, as hard as they may be, you give your business a greater chance of surviving. And by doing so, obviously, that ensures employment for those who remain. So things like retrenchments are never easy, but they are often necessary. You know, those are the really big ones, but I think we often overlook the small ones. You know, if you've got things like printers and other types of machinery that are on loan, assess whether they're all necessary, engage with service providers about whether you can reprice for your insurance, perhaps change service providers so you get a better rate. Easy things to do, but often get sort of lost in the wash as we try and just get through the day-to-day side of business. So I think at the end of the day, the point is look at the synergies within your business holistically and really try and curtail and trim things down as much as is possible so that you're as lean and agile as possible, because I think that that's what's going to ultimately give businesses the greatest chance of surviving. On to the next slide, which is, it's really the one in conclusion of the previous four. It's knowing where you stand. It's taking the time, despite the challenges of where we find ourselves, and despite the fact that everybody, I think, to some degree is feeling like they are scrambling and surviving rather than thriving at the moment. But take that step back and globally assess where your business is. Ensure that you've got a business continuity plan. And I think what's important when assessing that plan to understand is you're going to need to have a plan for the acute phase we're currently in, and then you're going to need to constantly assess that plan and amend that plan as we start to transition from the acute phase into the suppression phase and then into recovery. And with that is to build in what the possible ramifications will be depending what level government sets for both the country and obviously the province and districts within the province. I think government has been fairly clear that depending on infection rates, those levels are going to possibly change, and they have fairly extreme consequences depending what industry you're in. So plot that into your business continuity plan, understand how that flows for your business and how each change puts pressure points or brings pressure points into your business, and what you're going to need to do to account for that. So This is really where the space I play in the most. It's the what if. So what if you have done everything you can, you've engaged with your stakeholders, you've run your assessments, you have a business continuity plan, and all that you're doing is putting a plaster on a gaping wound. And it is hard to decide when that point is, and it's going to differ quite dramatically from one business and industry to the other. But there is a point at which it is important to look at your business and decide whether you now, as Ryan said, are throwing good money after bad, and it's time to possibly explore other options. And what are those other options? I think for a lot of people, they just simply think it's all over, it's a liquidation, it's the end of the business, I must pull the plug, I must get out. But the truth is that there are a couple of other options, and perhaps intrinsic to that is the more time you have, the more options you have, and the greater the prospects are that you might find a way to weather the storm. We often see businesses that will say to us when we sit down with them, 6 months ago, we thought that perhaps we should engage with people like yourself. And then we signed a new contract and we thought, well, that would just tide us over. And the difficulty is you run out of runway really quickly. And that's often the biggest challenge, because runway is timing, obviously, but probably more importantly, it's financial. It's the ability and to access funding to start to make those changes that are likely to give you the very best chance of making your way through it. So just to touch on some of the options, there's always the possibility of informally restructuring your company or your business. There are a lot of people who work in that space who are turnaround specialists. It is very difficult to do because it does require all your creditors to partner with you. It's no point having discussions with 3 or 4 key creditors and then suddenly you have a letter of demand or a liquidation application coming from some small creditor who's really just got sick and tired of always waiting at the back of the queue, has rushed off to their attorney, and now you find all the hard work you've sunk into trying to find an informal mechanism of restructuring your business has effectively been unraveled. So we do see informal turnaround, but it's usually where we can negotiate what we call a standstill. So everybody agrees to abide by no further action and to engage on a meaningful basis as to how they can partner and put together a plan to implement going forward. Then you've got formal restructuring, which would be what everyone knows as business rescue. It's got generally, I think I can say it's got generally a bad reputation. It's often abused. It's often used to stave off a liquidation application and simply to keep everybody at bay. And I think the other challenge is that certainly at the outset, there wasn't a particularly high bar to being qualified as a business rescue practitioner. And so you're not often comparing apples with apples when it comes to appointing somebody to take the role. And it's perhaps at that point that I cannot stress enough how important it is to make sure that if you do engage with somebody, or if your accountant or your attorney refers you to a business rescue practitioner to explore that as an option, you go to somebody that is reputable, who has been operating within the industry for some time and who's done quite a number of business rescues. They have a lot of benefits if used correctly. They're not inexpensive, which is also why it's so important to engage early. But if used properly, what it often does is create this statutory breathing room to allow the company to press pause effectively, to get somebody independent in to help them assess where they are and to help develop a plan to be implemented going forward. But the real bonus, the sort of the massive upshot of the formal restructuring as opposed to informal is once you're in business rescue, your creditors may not enforce claims against you. So you keep all of those sort of wolves from the door. And by doing that, you obviously take some of the pressure off, which invariably allows for just a greater ability to think about what you can change in your business. And then the really hard one, which is what to do if you have exhausted all available resources. And if there simply is nowhere else to go. And I don't think any business owner relishes the idea of getting to that point. But again, it is a hard conversation, I think, that business owners and management need to have, which is, at what point do you say here and no further? Because, you know, there are all kinds of other personal ramifications that often get tied into these kinds of decisions. Management's often required to sign sureties. If you own your own business, you frequently have required to register a mortgage, for instance, of your home in order to either access or increase facilities. And so it is imperative that you constantly are looking at your business and understanding at what point is this just not realistic anymore? At what point is it pie in the sky? You know, the hope springs eternal is now way behind you, and there's just very little room to move. And given how much time I spent in the liquidation side when I was still in practice, I think what I can say is try and make that decision yourself. Try and avoid a situation where one of your creditors brings a liquidation application, because often what then happens is you have little to no control as to how the process sort of unravels, and you get dragged along through somebody else's process. And you know, it's while not ideal, there are many people who have tried businesses that have, for whatever reason, not made it and have gone into liquidation. And, you know, those people will go on to start new businesses potentially. And I think that absent, you know, really extreme examples such as fraud and theft, which we see enough of if you open a daily newspaper. But I think where honest business owners have done their best, and for whatever the circumstances, have just said to hear and no more. You know, while very difficult to swallow as a creditor, invariably what I've seen in the past is that people are a lot more forgiving than one would think, even if at the outset it's a fairly sort of aggressive environment. I think for a lot of people, particularly if you look at the current environment with the COVID crisis, people appreciate that sometimes these things are just simply beyond your control. And I think from both a responsibility to your company, as well as to your staff and to your investors, and then often to yourselves as management, it is important to make that tough decision at the right stage. And again, to engage with reputable prospective liquidators, to use them as a sounding board. You know, in my experience, good business rescue practitioners, good turnaround specialists, and good liquidators will happily give you an hour to two of their time for free, simply to run through the scenario that you find yourselves in, and to try and give you a bit of a feel of their take on it, given their backgrounds. And I think, you know, if there's one thing to take out of this from your perspective, it's utilize that. Get hold of good people and say, do you mind giving me an hour of your time? If that's where you find yourselves. You know, you might find that 45 minutes to an hour later, the answer is it's not a liquidation, it's actually a business rescue, and you might just come through this. So it's good to explore, but in order to have those options on the table, you do need to be taking proactive decisions at every step as you take your business through this crisis and beyond. So just to recap, those are our 5 key strategies, and there will obviously be ones that are probably pertinent to your business that are not on that list. In your planning, add them on, discuss them as a management team, feed that information into your business continuity plan, and get a workable document into place so that you understand how you're going to survive and hopefully thrive on the other side of this crisis. So to end off, when it feels like you can't do anything, that is exactly when you need to do something. And on that note, thank you for your time. I hope you stay warm and stay safe. And I wish you all the very best. It is challenging times that we find ourselves, and no doubt I think we accept it's going to continue to be so for quite some time. So I'm hoping that that great South African spirit comes to the fore, and that we see as many people find a way through this, and that when we come on the other side, we have some really creative solutions to where we have the challenges we've come across along the way. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Justine. I thought there was some incredible content, really sobering, I have to be honest. Yeah, obviously, there are no silver bullets, as you said, and it's going to be a difficult time for all of us, I think. But we are in this together. I see we have run a little bit over time, but I thought it was well worth it. I thought it was good value. It was really great content, so thank you very much for that. I see there are still a few participants around, and there was a great question that came through from Duncan Dolman that I wondered if we could just touch on. And basically, Duncan was asking whether you have any tips with respect to managing that balance between sort of incurring debt to keep the business going, knowing full well that you may not be able to meet that obligation, versus avoiding personal liability as the business owner and an entrepreneur. Any comments with respect to that? You still muted, Justine?
There you go, not a mute. It's like the Zoom fail of the last 9 weeks for getting you on mute. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and one that a lot of people that sit in management are grappling with. And I also thought that it was fascinating to see a directive out of SIPSI recently, in terms whereof they said that the statutory notices that they're empowered to issue in terms of reckless trading would be suspended for the lockdown period, to the extent that the manner in which you're trading is directly linked to COVID. I read the directive and sort of tried to unpack it to better understand how that plays out from a legal perspective, because obviously SIPSI has the right to issue those notices and has said that it'll suspend its obligation to do so, but I'm not sure where that leaves you if, for instance, a creditor ultimately decides that in their view you have traded recklessly and you've incurred debt in circumstances where you know full well you're unlikely to be able to repay it. But I do think that there is a balance, because without access to funding, a lot of which is on offer at the moment, a lot of businesses will simply not survive. And you know, the test outside of a crisis like this is always a balance between objective and subjective. So it's you as an individual, your experience, your qualifications, and that then feeds and plays into the objective side of the test, which is sort of what would be ordinarily expected of somebody like yourself. So that's sort of the starting point. And I think that in the crisis that we find ourselves now, the litmus test for me would be, do you, in incurring the debt and accessing the funding, do you have a reasonable expectation, knowing what you know today, that this might tide you through the crisis? And I don't think anybody is expected to have a crystal ball that can predict where things are going to go. But I think so long as management is being responsible and is applying their minds, and to that end, I really would urge everybody to make sure that they document the thinking that management goes through in these types of decisions, and making sure that you have a record, because often it's very difficult down the line to remember quite what you were thinking at the time. But to the extent that you go through that process, I'm not sure that there will be much grounds to criticize.
Cool. Thanks, Justine. So there is slight silver lining, at least for some of us, and I guess that emphasizes the importance of sort of knowing when to pull the plug, so that you don't dig too much of a hole for yourself and incur too much of a personal liability. On that note, I'm well aware we've got way over time, so unfortunately we're going to have to end it there. But thank you very much, Justine. Really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate your insights. As well as the support from Azaz and the fantastic collaboration on the series. Thanks to all our participants, particularly those who are still on the call. Thank you very much for hanging around and being part of this conversation with us. I think, you know, we, as Accelerate Cape Town, we are well aware that many people might be experiencing cash flow problems at the moment. And we've recently acquired a operating license for a fantastic system hosted by BankServe, as a vendor payment system that will allow certainly suppliers to get paid quicker, but also allow a lot of medium to large businesses to improve their cash flow. And so please do keep an eye out for that webinar. We should be coming up towards the end of June. We will explain that system in more detail. And it's a system we'll be making available for free to all Accelerate Cape Town members. Okay, so on that note, thanks again, everybody, for hanging in there and being part of this. I want to wish you all a fantastic day. Be safe, take care, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Have a great day. Bye-bye.